The cuisine of Bali is often quite distinct from the rest of Malaysia for three reasons. First, because of a history with French settlers. Second, because Bali is not a Muslim region unlike the rest of Malaysia. And finally, because Balinese economy is largely driven by tourism, so dishes have evolved to suit European tastes in hotels and restaurants. On paper, this dish is clearly a relative of beef rendang, but the taste is quite different because of the cooking method and being without the coconut curry.
So I've assembled the ingredients here. I've got the brown sugar. I'm actually using a date palm sugar in this case. You can use regular brown sugar. This is the more authentic version. Turmeric, salt, lime juice, oil. It looks like a lot of oil here. It's a couple of ounces, 60 milliliters, but don't worry, it's going to be drained off. It's not going to be part of the final dish. It's part of the marinade and part of what makes the meat cook. So don't let the amount of fat here scare you. Don't let the amount of chili scare you either, because this mellows as it cooks. Yeah, it's going to be hot, but it's not going to be as fiery hot as you probably fear when you look at this much chili. The shallots, actually they use a different kind of shallot, slightly different kind of shallot there that you can't get outside of Malaysia, but taste-wise they're almost identical. Just use regular shallots. Don't use onions, need shallots. A little ginger, lemongrass, garlic, and I'm going to trim the ends off of these chilies, chop up the lemongrass a little bit more, and put all these in a blender in just a second here. Okay, I've got almost everything transferred into the stick blender cup now. These are the stems from the chilies I'm not using. The only other thing to add is a lemongrass. I'm showing you. You want to cut it up into small pieces like this because this lemongrass is very tough and fibery, and if you don't cut it up, it could ruin your stick blender. At the very least, it won't get chopped up very well. So you put all this together. We're going to process it with a stick blender, and then we're going to pass it through a sieve, as you'll see. This is probably the most difficult mixture there is to process with a stick blender, and you have to be careful with it and be patient with it because it really does want to bind up with the blades, and you may have to stop it a few times and scrape the blades off. Here's where things get really unusual in this recipe. We're going to pass this through a sieve, and we're going to use both the top part that doesn't pass through and the liquid that does go through in two different ways in this recipe. So you're going to have to be patient with it. Use, as you can see, it does come through. Use a spatula and rub it through as best you can. Try to get as much of the liquid out of this as you possibly can, because that's going to be providing flavor for the meat. Then eventually this is what you wind up with. You've got the liquidy portion here, and you've got this almost dry mixture here. We're going to use both parts. Next stage though is to cut up the meat. I want to use pork neck. It's got quite a bit of fat on it. If it has a big fat cap along here, then you want to trim it off. And if there's going to be some fat in here, but don't let that bother you, because this is going to be cooked a couple of different times, and the fat is mostly going to drain off of it. What you're going to end up with is nice tender pieces of pork. If you use pork that's completely lean, it'll be dry and nasty and chewy, so don't use pork that's too lean. And like I said, if there's some extra fat on it, don't let that worry you. It's going to melt and run off and leave the pork tender. So we want to cut this into large enough cubes that it'll go onto a skewer, and it'll be able to be roasted on a skewer before it gets braised, as you'll see. Okay, once you've got the meat cubed up, it goes into this bowl where you had the liquid portion of this, and then this gets mixed around. This is your marinade for the pork. And once you mix it around, you can see that is plenty of marinade for all this meat. Now this gets covered with cling film, goes in the refrigerator, and along with this solids, these are also going to get put in the refrigerator, and we'll come back to them in a little while. After it's been marinated, you put them on skewers like this, and you're going to broil them under the oven. Make sure that you have some space between the skewers, and don't try to do them all at once. As you can see, I've got more here I'm going to do in a second batch. This is just the way it has to be. So do them in a couple of batches, make sure there's space between them, and if you've got them about 6 inches or 15 centimeters from the broiler, it should take about 14 minutes before they're ready to turn, and then you're going to turn them and give them about 4 more minutes. But your broiler may vary. And here's what it looks like after 14 minutes in the oven. I'm going to turn these over. Now these aren't going to want to stay turned over because the weight distribution is what it is. So you gotta just put them like this. Just lean them in the pan. That's fine. These go back into the oven. Don't worry about them being even. They'll cook just fine. And here we have the skewers after a couple more minutes. You probably want to use tongs to pick these up. I'm okay with it, but I'm going to transfer these off. Now you're going to have some fat and oil in this pan, and rather a lot of it. You don't want to keep this because there's very little flavor in this, and we're going to add some other flavoring for this. So this is going to let it cool down just a little bit, and this is just going to be poured out and discarded. What we've got here are this pork on the skewers that in a minute I'll pull them off the skewers and put them in there. We're going to braise this next, and then once I clean this pan out, get rid of this oil, I'm going to put the next batch of skewers on it and do the same thing we just did in the broiler. Okay, drained the oil from this. I've got the last of the pork on skewers, and this is going to go into the broiler now just like the first batch did. Now we're going to make up what's a sort of bouquet garni of sorts. We have the solids that came off of the what we strained and became the marinade. This is the solids from it. I'm going to put this in along with a couple of bay leaves, and we're going to tie this up. You can use any piece of cloth you want. Cheesecloth is usually used for this sort of thing, but I don't want anything leaking out, so I'm going to use linen. This is just an old shirt. It's been through the wash. It works perfectly for this. Just tie it up like this with a pouch with a string around it. There we go. So this little packet is going to go in with the braise. So here's the second batch that came out. I'm going to scrape these off into the same braising dish in just a second. The burnt remains and oil that goes in here, this is no good. You just want to get rid of this. It's kind of burnt and nasty tasting. So let's just do this now. Yeah, it's hot. Don't do it with your fingers. Do it with a knife. It's pretty hot. Okay, or with a fork. Now we have the leftover, the marinade. There's not very much of it, but it's flavor. And we're going to add this at the top here. Don't worry about it. Yeah, it's got raw pork in there, but you know that's going to be cooked for the next 2 hours. So whatever bacteria are in there is, which isn't going to be too many, given the amount of salt and spices in there. But whatever's in there isn't really going to matter. And then we have this pouch that we prepared earlier. Goes in, and then now this is ready for the braise. And here we have what looks like after the braise time. Opening it up here. Get this bag, we'll get this out of the way. And we'll give it a little stir. Toss it around. Re-moisten it. Then we put the lid back on it and just let it cool down covered so that it can reabsorb some of that moisture.
If you want to know more about my adventures as a chef around the world and have some great laughs along the way, be sure to check out the video tour of my book, 40 Years in One Night. It's up on YouTube right now. Click the link. If you like my videos, look for my cookbook, now available through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other internet bookseller sites. Also look for my cocktail book, Cocktails of the South Pacific and Beyond, Advanced Mixology, available through Amazon online.